veterans in the Valley area of Los Angeles. So in Los Angeles, and forgive me because I haven't seen the prior portion of the event, so forgive me if some of this is redundant, and some of this is obvious too. But obviously, we have a terrible housing crisis here in Los Angeles, and we've had a terrible housing crisis for many years. And unfortunately, the problem keeps getting worse. So the latest homeless count in LA County, we had, I think, 67,000 homeless people. And I think for every year except for the last years, the number of homeless people in LA County has increased. And that's despite the fact that we're spending $500 million dollars or more per year to try to address the problem. So we try to think about the problem from first principles and thinking about, is there a way that we could create affordable housing without a subsidy? Like, could you actually truly make housing that is just simply affordable without the government needing to do anything, frankly? So the current money that's being spent, we're spending over $500,000 per unit of new affordable housing that's being created. And we just don't have that kind of money to create all the housing that's needed. So when you do the math on it, we have about $7,200 per year per homeless person. And so by spending over 500,000, that ends up leaving so many people, left out in the cold. So, our thought is the sort of the conventional wisdom is that you need to build housing in the urban areas because that's where the jobs are. But it's difficult to build more housing in the urban areas because there's just not a lot of land that's still available. The land that's there is very expensive. And it's challenging to be creating more housing in the urban areas. So sort of a key part of our plan is to utilize the rural areas. And we actually have in LA County in the Antelope Valley, there's more than 400,000 acres of privately owned land that's sitting dormant. It's zoned for agriculture, and it's just not being used at all. And the land is very, very cheap. So if you were lucky enough to find you could buy an acre for about $3,000. I actually bought 40 acres for $25,000. Yes. Should I turn off the mic?
Yeah, yeah, I'm here. That seems like something that's coming in from Aries microphone. We could try a quick refresh, but it seems like a microphone specific thing.
I see. I
Oh, I
put
think
the
Barry's
mic
on
back.
mute. Hey, Barry.
Still, do you want me to? Oh, you know what? I have an idea for what I can do. Sorry. Are you able to hear me? Still. Really? Bummer. Well, I can refresh, but then I'll have to come back in, right? Should I go ahead and refresh? Okay. Sorry for this problem.
Yeah, it seems like the mic is faulty. That's what it seems like to me. So you refresh also might not, and maybe switching to another mic, like you were mentioning, or one with headphones, probably.
Okay, is that any better, I hope? Oh, yeah. Okay, is that better? Okay, okay, good. Sorry about that. Well, so sorry, where was I? I was talking about the land, and the land in the Antelope Valley is very inexpensive. And because the cost of land is, part of the cost of housing, you can get the cost of housing down dramatically if you're building out in the Antelope Valley. And then another part of the solution, if instead you're building 200 square feet, that's a tenth of the size, it's a tenth of the materials, a tenth of the labor. And so tiny houses, rural areas, and then another piece of the puzzle is to have on-site jobs so that people have an opportunity to earn income that they can use to pay for their inexpensive housing, and they also can have a lower cost of living because they don't need to commute to the city. And um, so one of the difficulties of using the land out in the Antelope Valley is that ordinarily you would need to get a building permit. And the land that I'm talking about is primarily in the unincorporated area of LA County. So if you're in a city, you deal with the city. But if you're in the unincorporated area, you deal with the county. And the county is notoriously slow and difficult when it comes to issuing building permits. The average, it takes more than 3 years to get a building permit in unincorporated areas of LA County. Um, but our plan is to have the folks who are living on these properties be um, farm workers. So basically, for each of the properties to have a collaborative farm where people who are living there are also working on the farm, and then they qualify as farm workers. And a really big advantage of that is that you then can fall under the state's employee housing framework, and the housing that's provided can be considered employee housing. So that's an entirely different set of regulations than trying to build a single family residence, a traditional house. And people kind of imagine a lot of people like tiny houses, and people are constantly emailing me about tiny houses and what can they do, where can they put them. A lot of people think that if you buy your own land, you can put a tiny house on it, but that's not the case. Um, you in the unincorporated areas, you're not allowed to have a house that's smaller than 800 square feet, and you're not allowed to live in a trailer or an RV, even on your own property. However, for employee housing, you are allowed to have a tiny house on wheels or a trailer or an RV or even a tent. So if you can get your housing to fall under the employee housing framework, now you have a lot more flexibility in terms of what kind of housing you could use. You don't need to wait 3 years to try to get a building permit. And then another huge benefit is that you're actually allowed to have 12 houses on one property if it's employee housing. Ordinarily, you're only allowed to have one house plus an ADU. And so with the employee housing, you can have a tiny house, you can be on wheels, you can have 12 of them, and it's fast. So we feel like we're onto something here with our blueprint, and Thrive LA is collaborating with another nonprofit called Life Source Oasis that has as its mission to help female veterans in particular. So we're working on our pilot project with them to house 6 female veterans on property that's owned in the Palmdale area by Life Source Oasis. We could do 12, but we're trying to not bite off more than we can chew on this pilot project and keep it as manageable as we can. We submitted an application to the state of California, the Department of Housing and Community Development, which oversees the employee housing. We submitted our application to operate employee housing, and we were issued a facility ID for that. And the housing in particular that we're planning to use is from a company called Boxable. And Boxable has a gorgeous unit they call the Casita that folds up into a box-like shape, the shape of a shipping container. It's not a shipping container, but it folds up, and then at your site, when it's delivered, it gets unfolded, and it's around 400 square feet. And the unit is $60,000. So dramatically less than the $500,000 that the government's been paying for new units. And so we're inching closer to launching our pilot project. But it's been an incredibly educational journey to see all that exists here in this space of trying to create housing for veterans. You'd think the government would make it easy, but they don't. And I've really just kind of barely scratched the surface on all of the hurdles that exist. So that's sort of an overview of the project, and I would really, I could talk a lot more, but I'd love to take any questions people have so I can tailor my comments to what you guys are thinking about and focused on. And if we're waiting for comments, I do have one other sort of bit of perspective I would like to share, which is back when Abraham Lincoln was president in 1862, he signed into law the Homestead Act. And so under the Homestead Act, anyone could pick 160 acres that by the federal government was most of the land in the country. And if you lived there, if you built a home on it and you lived there for 5 years, the land was yours. And over 600,000 Americans got their land that way, did that. These are the pioneers. And these are people that we hold up in great esteem. We hold them as heroes. And if you think about it, every single one of them was homeless. When they arrived on the land, there was nothing there. And it was a lot harder to do anything back in the 1800s than it is now. There were no roads, there were no power tools, no Amazon, no YouTube, no Wikipedia, you name it, right? And it should be much, much easier today for people to build a homestead, to build a farm, a collaborative farm. But, part of the problem is we don't even imagine that anyone could take care of themselves. That if someone's homeless, now they only can make it if they get government help, if they get a handout. And another thing, there's a stereotype about the homeless. People assume, that the homeless have mental illness or substance abuse issues. And it turns out that the majority of the homeless do not have either of those problems and are homeless strictly for economic reasons. So, it shouldn't be that surprising. Rents are so high, and most people don't even have $400 in savings. It's very easy to find yourself in a situation where you can't afford the rent and become homeless. So I guess what I would, urge people to start thinking about more is can we create opportunities for people, especially working together, to pull themselves up and build their own housing, create their own housing, create their own farms, just like people used to do, and have that as an additional pathway toward helping to ease the housing crisis. Okay, my pleasure. Take care, everybody.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Jamil. I'm going to